something horrifying about every country in the world.
In no particular order.
The country of Oman is an absolute monarchy. The Sultan holds complete and total power over every aspect of the country's systems and laws. As such, human rights there aren't so great. The entire country of Cuba has 6 sides and 8 vertices. Just kidding. But the first modern concentration camps were built in Cuba in the 1890s. Under the Spanish Reconcentración policy, they were used to isolate Cuban civilians from rebel groups during the Cuban War of Independence. Historians believe that around 170,000, or about 10% of the Cuban population, died of disease or malnourishment in these camps. Women have the real short end of the stick in Qatar. While men can face life imprisonment over sexual violence against women, their victims can also be charged with having an extramarital affair. Real messed up. After watching his grandfather duke it out with his brothers for the throne, Mehmed II formally legalized fratricide in the Ottoman Empire in what is now Turkey. So if you think your brother is trying to take your crown, you can legally give him a royal smackdown. Even well before the colonization of Africa, indigenous slavery was the core powerhouse of the Ghanaian economy, dating as far back as the 1500s. The Aztecs of what is now Mexico worshipped a dog-headed god named Xolotl. They believed that the divine doggo to be the protector of souls as they traveled to the afterlife. As such, family pets were often sacrificed and buried with their recently deceased owners to serve as spiritual guides. Who's a good boy? Back when it was known as Drukyul, or the Land of the Thunder Dragon, governors of the newly united country of Bhutan concealed the death of their leader for 54 years in order to prevent a civil war. If someone asked, they simply said that he was away on a silent retreat. They passed laws and completed government tasks in his name. Under complete communist rule in 1950, hundreds of political prisoners were forced through the Pest experiments, several trials of re-educational torture in order to prove their loyalty to communism. Hundreds were publicly humiliated, physically and mentally tortured to the brink of death, and forced to denounce friends, family, and all non-communist beliefs. Dozens died, either from the experiments or by their own hands. Not wanting to be dominated by a minority ethnic group, many Sinhalese people of Sri Lanka participated in the Black July riots of 1983, which sought to destroy their political and cultural rivals, the Tamil people. Over 6 days, 23,000 Tamil homes and businesses were destroyed, with an official death count of 5,638 Tamil people. Whew, is it hot in here or is it just Honduras? Must be them, because the world's deadliest prison fire happened there. The accidental blaze broke out in February of 2012, engulfing the Komajaga prison, claiming the lives of 361 people, including prisoners and visitors. A couple huge contributions to such a large number was the sheer overcrowding of the prison, lack of emergency fire procedures, and the fact that prison guards just didn't bother unlocking prisoners from their cells for a chance at escape. The thing that sucks about living on an island nation is that there's not a lot of places to go when shit hits the fan. A catastrophic eruption of the Laki volcano in 1783 in Iceland brought about the Móðuharðindi, or mist hardships. This was a toxic sulfur dioxide fog that plagued most of the country, evaporating a quarter of its population and 80% of its livestock. Sounds pretty unlucky to me. Ugh, Afghanistan. 2 words. Make sure you're in incognito mode if you decide to look that up. Although pretty uncommon, pilot sperm whales can get all disoriented and accidentally beach their blowholes on the shores of Dominica thanks to geological and human influence. Now that wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that the rest of the pod blindly follows the leader. Believe it or not, a mass sacrificial cave was accidentally discovered in 2006 in the Cayo district of Belize. Archaeological evidence shows thousands of bones from at least 118 victims, most of which being young children. They were believed to have been sacrificed to the Mayan rain god Chak during extreme droughts. Some of the bones date as far back as 3,000 years ago. Thankfully, it's probably rained at least a few times since then. The previous dictatorship in the Gambia employed the Junglers Death Squad, a paramilitary group that would gank any political opponents, wrap a friendly wire around their necks, and disrespectfully dump them in a well. Doesn't do any favors for the local water supply. Although highly illegal, it's estimated that roughly 12,000 women and girls are kidnapped each year and forced into marriages in Kyrgyzstan. The practice, hilariously enough, is called alakachu, and they do catch you. Mauritania was the last country on Earth to officially abolish slavery, finally putting it into law in 1981. It's just a shame that there's still tens of thousands of slaves to this day. Cattle are so integral to the culture of South Sudan that they've essentially been the cause of many of the country's war efforts. While delivering a sermon in 1980, Archbishop Oscar Romero once publicly condemned El Salvador's horribly repressive military government. The repressive military government delivered a single silver bullet into his heart. A single tsunami flushed away over 160,000 Indonesian residents in 2004. But what do you expect when living in the world's largest archipelagic country? With Rwanda, you know it's going to be about the genocide. The Kigali and Nyamata memorials in Rwanda still hold the remains and possessions of many of the victims of, the genocide that occurred there in 1994. A crippling combo of drought, crappy soil, and classic colonial neglect culminated in several famines across Cabo Verde's history, forcing starving residents to dine on inedible roots, grass, and rotten animal feed. Tens of thousands died. The Shuar people of Ecuador have a history of shrinking the heads of their enemies. The practice, called sansa, ripped the rival's skin from skull, boiled it, and shrunk it down to the size of a fist. It's believed to have trapped and harnessed the power of the poor fella's soul. Talk about getting head. If you're Armenian, your ancestors persevered through lots, and I mean lots, of genocides and massacres and all kinds of atrocities. So make sure your bloodline of trials and tribulations doesn't go to waste. Now, the US is often the whipping boy when it comes to talking about slavery, but yeah, the Dutch rank real high up there in terms of complete brutality of African slaves during their colonial rule of Suriname. You might want to check out the over 500-page-long chronicles of Dutch soldier John Stedman, who witnessed the cruelty firsthand. Some real nasty stuff in his writings. In the absolute death traps that were 1700s Barbados sugar mills, it was fairly common for exhausted and overworked slaves to topple over into open iron cauldrons full of boiling sugar. Mozambique had a civil war that lasted over 15 years. Over 1 million people died. The catalyst? Communism. The country of Peru once had a Japanese president. Okay, well that's not horrifying, but his mass sterilization programs in the mid to late 90s that forcibly sterilized over 300,000 impoverished people without their informed consent surely was. The Maldives are beautiful, especially their coral reefs. It's just a shame that many buttholes mine the shit out of them for construction purposes, which cause whole sections to die off. Luckily though, conservation efforts have been on the rise. Now, it isn't so much what the world did to Mongolia, but what Mongolia did to the world. Mongol conquest in the 13th and 14th centuries completely curb-stomped vast stretches of Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. Tens of millions died. According to The Who, not the band, Slovakia, back when it was part of Czechoslovakia, ranked pretty high in the world for men checking themselves out of life. During the famous Great Siege of Malta in 1565, defending knights practiced their resourcefulness by ripping off the heads of the enemy Ottoman soldiers and using them as cannonballs. Speaking of Ottoman Empire heads, Montenegrin soldiers formed a hobby of converting Ottoman soldiers' noodles into badass lawn ornaments. In 1545, a Bolivian prospector discovered the world's largest silver deposits. It's just too bad that the Spanish colonized the place shortly after in the 1550s and forced the natives to slave away in the harsh mines for nearly 300 years, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands. It takes only about 20 minutes to drive around the teeny tiny island of Nauru, but it took 3 days for Japanese forces to occupy the island and put everyone into labor camps during World War II. The thing about dictators is they really don't like you protesting their power. Thousands thought it would be a good idea to protest the dictatorship in Togo in the early 90s. It wasn't. Want to play a game of Minesweeper in real life? Well, head on down to Micronesia, where you can accidentally plant a piggy on any one of the thousands of unexploded bombs left over from World War II. Sao Tome became the first large-scale European sugar plantation colony in the 15th century, thanks to the Portuguese. If you're looking for some proactive years on your resume, Eswatini historically ranks pretty high in the child labor category. Okay, so if you ever see a small island with like an active volcano on it, don't live there, cause 9 times out of 10, it'll erupt and kill everyone you know and love. Like how La Souffliere did in 1902 on the island nation of St. Vincent. Azerbaijan has a strong history of oil extraction, the impact of which will continue to pollute the Caspian Sea for centuries to come. In 2012, a group of 34 platinum miners near the town of Marikana in South Africa were pretty pissed about their horrid wages to swing their pickaxes. And the South African police were pretty pissed about wasting their ammunition to gun them all down. Slovenia has a commission on concealed mass graves. That's because over 750 mass graves created during or after World War II have been discovered. These were almost exclusively dug by Soviet Union forces and filled with over 100,000 soldiers and civilians alike. Back in the days of the jutting jaw Habsburg Empire in what is now Hungarian territory, various villagers properly panicked, believing that the dead were returning from the grave. I want to suck your dick. Ooh. Dubbed the vampire panic of the 18th century, thousands of corpses were exhumed from their tombs only to have a stake jammed into their hearts or their bodies burned to ash. The 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile was the strongest ever recorded in history, clocking in at a magnitude 9.5. That's bad. Nearly 1,700 perished and over 2 million rendered homeless. Papua New Guinea has a pretty bad history of witchcraft and sorcery accusations, but that's nothing that a little public mutilation can't fix. Just a few years after gaining its independence, Bangladesh suffered a horrible famine that came about from flooding, government mismanagement, and classic corruption. In just 9 months, an estimated 1.5 million were famished and vanished. In the 18th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was chopped up and divided amongst Prussia, Russia, and Austria. In fact, Poland itself completely disappeared from the world map before making a comeback and finally regaining its independence 123 years later in 1918. As we learned with Cuba, concentration camps weren't just a thing in World War II. Serbia used 17 camps against Bosniak and Croat forces during the Yugoslav wars. Prisoners were subjected to, well, just exactly what you'd expect from a concentration camp. Ne Win, the dictator of Myanmar from 1962 to 1988, was deeply superstitious and obsessed with numerology, specifically his lucky number, 9. He went a bit overboard when he decided to demonetize most banknotes in 1987, replacing them with 45 and 90 notes because they were divisible by, you guessed it, the number 9. Ah well, citizens could just trade in their worthless notes, right? Nope, no compensation or trades were ever offered, so the vast majority of the country lost their entire life savings just like that. Paraguay really got their shit stomped during the War of the Triple Alliance. After losing like 80% of its male population, Paraguayan President Francisco Solano Lopez forcibly conscripted children as young as 9 years old to continue the war effort. They wore fake beards and charged in the battle, only to, die. In 1980, Saudi Arabian Flight 163 experienced an engine fire almost immediately after takeoff. After a bit of panic, the plane successfully returned to the airport, but then was completely engulfed in flames before emergency evacuations could even be performed. All 301 passengers and crew perished. Equatorial Guinea was home to the Christmas Eve massacre in 1969. Soldiers were ordered to dress up in Santa Claus outfits as they jingle bell rocked over 150 political opponents. Santa slay? No, Santa slay. In the incredibly unstable country of Guinea-Bissau, there's a lot of Guineas, they never had a president fully complete their term. They've either been assassinated or booted from office. Sure, it's just a city, but the Vatican City is a country. The smallest one on Earth, in fact. In 1252, a not-so-innocent Pope, Innocent IV, formally authorized the use of torture when interrogating suspected heretics. The stipulation was that while victims could sustain inexplicable pain to the brink of death, they just weren't allowed to die. Many died. Neo-Assyrian king Ashurnasirpal II had his grave extensively decorated with endless bragging of the various and violent torture methods that he used against his enemies. We're talking popping out eyes, ripping off limbs, and just letting them roam around eyeless and armless in pure agony. Pretty fucking metal. In 1950, the US government conducted Operation Sea Spray, a covert biological experiment in the San Francisco Bay Area. Seemingly harmless bacteria were spooted into the air to measure the impact of potential biological warfare. Although successful in its goal, the bacteria ended up putting 10 people in the hospital and at least one person in a grave. Oopsies. Brunei's vast wealth is historically tied to its oil industry. And only its oil industry. Hopefully the wells don't dry up anytime soon. Big baddie Joseph Stalin weaponized famine against Ukrainian uprisings. After all was said and done, it's estimated that between 3.5 to 5 million Ukrainians bit the dust as a result of the Holodomor famine between 1932 and 1933. With limited arable land, garbage soil, and increasing saltwater intrusion, Tuvalu is pretty ill-equipped to produce its own food. As such, Tuvalu-Valuvians have to import 80% of their food, which means that they're one freak natural disaster away from crippling starvation. The historical region of what is now Mali was deeply connected to the days of the trans-Saharan slave trade, which was run by Arabic merchants for 1,300 years. Since it is in the middle of buttfuck nowhere in the ocean, the nation of Kiribati was the ideal location for Operation Grapple, the UK's very own hydrogen and nuclear bomb tests in the late 1950s. According to Mayan folklore, the region that is now modern-day Guatemala was home to the Aloshis, knee-high little nature spirits that protected crops, but also caused all kinds of misfortunes to anyone who disrespected the land. If you litter, you get the critters. There was a huge problem in the 1980s in India with the introduction of ultrasound technology in hospitals. Families were terminating their girls and preferring their babies to be boys. You see, girls are seen as a financial drain due to marriage dowries, whereas boys could be a potential financial gain. It got so bad that the government had to pass the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act in 1994, which banned knowing the gender of the baby before birth. Unfortunately, it just ended up delaying the family's decision by a few months. I hope you never get arrested in Venezuela, because those gang-controlled, overpopulated, underfunded prisons will rip you a new asshole, and probably do something to said asshole. Something you won't like. People in Malawi are super superstitious. They believe individuals with albinism bring luck and wealth, so they rip them up and eat them. You know, there's so many places that aren't Andorra. But Andorra was home to many spies, liars, strays, and runaways during Spain's civil war in the late 1930s. Austrian serial killer Johann Unterweger was arrested in 1976. In his newly found spare time, he began writing in prison, which gained the attention of several Austrian intellectuals. Apparently writing really well, no matter your background, is an okie dokie from the literature club. They were so moved by his works that they actually advocated for his release, believing that he had rehabilitated himself through his writings. He was released, and then almost immediately killed several more people. Croatia had its own death squad during World War II called the Ustasha. They stomped around committing some war crimes that made even the Nazis cringe. The country of Liechtenstein is very small and located right next to Switzerland. Being so nuzzled next to the Swiss, Liechtensteiners adopted the same policy of neutrality during World War II. This caused much internal anxiety as the world effectively collapsed around them. Can you believe that Kenyans are superstitious? Unordinary births like twins, deformities, or anything that wasn't a single healthy baby was viewed as a curse, so the babies were left to fend for themselves in the wild. It didn't last very long.
Daddy.
This is the Monte Carlo Casino. It opened up in 1865 as a last resort for Monaco before the small nation faced complete bankruptcy. In just 4 years, the casino proved so successful that Monaco completely abolished personal income tax. That gamble really paid off, didn't it? Failed food harvests and fierce freezes forced a Finnish famine from 1866 to 1868. By the end, over 150,000 Finns were finished. Speaking of losing a portion of the population, Estonia lost nearly 20% of its people because of the World War sequel. Having a buddy over for dinner meant something entirely different in pre-modern Tonga. Bunch of cannibals. Before striking oil, Bahrain's economy almost exclusively relied on pearls. This meant that everyone and their mother were out there diving the depths in hopes of picking a pretty pearl without proper protection. So yeah, a lot of them drowned. It's not a good idea to be a politician in Comoros. People just keep assassinating the leader. Do yourself a favor, and I know this is gonna sound obvious, but don't walk around active volcano craters. The very active White Island volcano in New Zealand exploded in 2019, cooking 22 tourists to a crisp. Ancient Athens in ancient Greece suffered a nasty ancient plague around 430 BC. Historians believe that around a third of the city done died from the dang thing. The Swiss had their own witch trials between the 15th and 18th centuries. The Valais witch trials saw hundreds executed. Probably none of them real witches. Ah, the French. You know about the French Revolution, right? Well, things got really out of hand once the Reign of Terror started. If you weren't with the revolutionaries, they were against you. For example, the Noailles du Nantes were the mass drownings of over 4,000 prisoners in the River Loire in the early 1790s. Over 10,000 workers in Costa Rican banana plantations went on strike in 1934, demanding more appealing pay and 8-hour workdays. After several weeks of bringing the banana market to a halt, they were successful. They got their 8-hour workdays and their newer, healthier wage, 15 cents an hour. This is Antigua, and that is Barbuda. They're Caribbean islands that were once under British control, so you know what that means. The Nanjing Massacre of 1937 was brutal. Imperial Japanese forces invaded the Chinese nationalist government's capital of Nanjing and proceeded to commit many atrocities. As many as 300,000 Chinese soldiers and civilians were cut down where they stood. Côte d'Ivoire sounds pretty French, doesn't it? That's because the French colonized the heck out of it in 1893. What are you laughing at, Libya? Y'all were occupied by the Italians for 32 years up until the end of World War II. Civil conflict within the Republic of the Congo is so bad that they forget to care about the extreme poaching of gorillas, elephants, and chimpanzees. Poor fellas. Normally, you think of Africa as being hot, but the entire African country of Lesotho is up in the mountains, so it gets cold. Like, wipe out your entire family cold. Way back before you were blasted out of your dad's balls, one Thomas Baker did an oopsie by brushing against the head of the chief of Fiji in 1867. This was a big no-no in their culture. Thomas's simple mistake turned him into Mr. Steak, because they ate him. In order to appease their pagan gods, Lithuanian warriors of old would sacrifice prisoners of war, sometimes just hucking in a horse for good measure, though the Horsies reportedly opposed their tradition with a resounding nay. Albanian blood feuds were a mess. If a man from your family offed someone, then a dude from the victim's family had a legal right to seek revenge. This resulted in hundreds of families simply remaining locked in their houses to keep away from trouble. Peter I of Portugal had a secret lover, and she was murdered. But after catching and convicting her murderers, King Peter reportedly ripped their hearts out with his bare hands, a symbolic gesture for what they had done to him. The country of Cyprus got pretty fucked in the medieval era. Plague and piracy killed over half of the island's population in the 14th century. Niger, historically, holds the record for most child brides. Over 75% of women under the age of 18 are forced into arranged marriages. Something about family honor or inheritance. The Aral Sea in Kazakhstan wasn't a sea, it was a lake, but now it's barely a puddle thanks to the Soviet Union, which diverted its water supply for irrigation purposes in the 1960s. Polynesian nations like Samoa have a rich history of explorers seeking out other islands to call home, but with limited technology, one bad storm could be enough to have them charting the ocean depths instead. Yemen had a civil war start in 2014, and it's still going on as of this video in 2026. Infamous communist dictator Pol Pot knew that he needed to crack a few eggs in order to transform Cambodia into a pure agrarian socialist society. He ended up cracking nearly 3 million eggs. And by eggs, I mean people. Abandoned Somali ruins are believed to be haunted by evil spirits that, if you get too close, will probably, I don't know, give you a nasty scratch or something. During the 1947 partition of India and Pakistan, many witnessed the sheer horror of ghost trains. Literal trains filled with corpses of passengers that were seeking refuge across the border but were intercepted and annihilated before they could make it. Lots of local legends love the lore of lady spirits that end up being murderous maidens, and Nicaragua is no different. La Mocuana is said to be the vengeful spirit of a Nicaraguan woman who was betrayed by a Spanish conquistador. She was deliberately trapped in a cave after telling the Spanish about her tribe's gold. She is said to wander the mountainsides, luring men into caves to trap them for eternity. When you think of the term banana massacre, you might imagine a fruit-filled room of monkeys left to their own devices, but the real banana massacre of 1928 was when the Colombian army opened fire on a bunch of banana plantation workers as they were on strike. That's much less silly. Archaeological evidence has dug up a whole bunch of mass graves in the city of Carthage in Tunisia. The burial sites contain over 20,000 tombs for children which, allegedly, were sacrificed in the name of Phoenician and Punic religions. Burundi ranks among one of the poorest nations in the world. Combined with decades of ongoing political violence and generational trauma, it's a wonderful place to avoid. The bodies of Pompeii in Italy are pretty horrific when you remember that these were real people really experiencing their very real deaths, only to be immortalized as morbid statues for people thousands of years in the future to take pictures of and be like, neat. So I came across the statistic that the horribly underfunded and neglectful Canadian Indigenous residential schools had a 5 times higher mortality rate than regular Canadian schools, and then I'm like, wait, were the kids in the properly funded schools just kicking the bucket too? What is this, the US? Lebanon experienced Black Saturday in 1975, a bout of extreme religious violence which ended up in about 200 casualties. I prefer Black Friday, we could probably save $200 depending on the deals you get. Uzbekistan got shafted by Stalin in the 1930s with all of the agricultural collectivization and the eventual eradication of the Aral Sea in the 1960s. No feasts means lots of famine. During World War II, the UK Royal Air Force bombarded San Marino after intelligence reported German troops in the area. The intelligence was wrong. The mistake cost the lives of 63 civilians. In 1961, the UK formally apologized and paid the modern equivalent of £2.3 million as compensation. In 1830, the French strolled their asses into Ottoman-controlled Algeria and were all, oh, this is mine now, but like in French. Right next door to Algeria is Morocco. Yeah, the French controlled that too for a time. Oh, this is mine also. Djibouti was, oh goddammit France! Native ritual enslavement was a hot trend for centuries in Angola. Now you can't blame that on colonial powers, can you? Many natives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo relied on power statues as contractual agreements. These little fellas called Nikisinakondi, or spirit hunters, were used to seal the deals, each represented by an individual nail or peg. Should the deal be broken, the guilty party would face the wrath of the spirit contained in the statue. He gonna ruin your day something awful. Being a royal servant in ancient Cameroon was a bummer and a half. When the king died, there was a real chance that you'd have to send yourself to the Shadow Realm, accompanying the king into the afterlife. Can't even cash in your 401k. Some Dominicans believe in the legend of the Galipote, shape-shifting demons that can take the form of any object, from dogs to hogs, from rocks to roosters. Whenever ancient Bulgarians were looking to beef up security to protect a village against disease or disaster, they would take up their swords and sacrifice a lamb or two. During the Great War sequel, Japanese forces occupied Timor-Leste and promptly wiped out villages and food supplies in order to establish a better defensive perimeter in the Pacific. They finally left in 1945 and all was well. Until Indonesian forces invaded 30 years later and did the same dang thing. Britain formally banned the slave trade in 1807, which included the country of Seychelles, but slave owners just kept capturing new slaves like, yeah, we already own them, so fuck you. Ever hear of the Guadalcanal campaign on the Solomon Islands? Probably not, but it was one of the bloodiest series of battles between the US and Japan. The US lost 7,000 troops and the Japanese lost 30,000. You can probably guess who won. Peanut butter and jelly, ham and cheese, Africa and Civil War, all iconic duos. Well, in its highest estimates, the Nigerian Civil War of the late 1960s is believed to have caused the deaths of nearly 3 million people, mostly from starvation. In hindsight, maybe the sandwich combo comparisons weren't the most appropriate. Oh, crocky. For over 80 years, the British had shipped over 160,000 of their worst criminals down under to Australia. They were used in forced labor to help build the new British colonies there. You know, because they lost the American colonies. Sweden was home to the Vipeholm experiments in 1945. Dentists and candy companies teamed up to force mental hospital patients to eat sticky, sugary sweets for 10 years in order to see if it rotted their teeth. It rotted their teeth. Thomas Sankara became the leader of Burkina Faso in 1983. He campaigned on anti-corruption, supported vaccination campaigns, women's rights, all that good stuff. But no good deed goes unpunished. He was assassinated just a few years later. Here's your new word of the day. Defenestration. It's when you huck someone out of a window. Both Catholics and Protestants were giving each other the window treatment back in the days of the Kingdom of Bohemia. Nowadays, the area is called the Czech Republic. Kuwait has crude oil just leaking out of every orifice. The end of the 1991 Gulf War saw retreating Iraqi troops destroying hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells. The wrecked wells have been creating vast crude oil lakes which are poisoning the local ecosystem. Belarus was minding its own business until one day a little-known and poorly designed facility called the Chernobyl nuclear power plant shit its britches, spewing radiation every which way. Belarus took the brunt of it, absorbing roughly 70% of the disaster's radioactive fallout. The Kingdom of Wadai in Chad was once one of the more powerful African kingdoms in the 1800s. How did they do it? Lots of bloodshed and heavy slavery. Turkmenistan had itself a communist dictator. This is Saparmurat Nietsov, and he was a real son bitch. How do I know this? The guy legally changed the names of months and days, changed the Turkmen word for bread to that of his mom's name, wrote a spiritual book and made it mandatory learning in all schools, banned video games, long hair on men, opera, ballet, closed libraries and hospitals outside of the capital, and was just overall a narcissistic butthole. He died in 2006. In 1524, German peasants thought themselves powerful enough to rebel against their aristocratic oppressors. They were not. The nobles quickly quelled the rebellion, resulting in as many as 100,000 petty peasants perishing. During the days of the Ottoman Empire, young Christian lads of North Macedonia feared the devshirme system, a blood tax that was paid by getting ripped from your family, converted to Islam, and forced to serve for the Ottoman military. Power over Palau was getting tossed around like a kid at a billionaire's birthday bash. Since the 18th century, Palau had traded hands between the Spanish, the Germans, the Japanese, the Americans, and sprinkled in a bit of British influence. It finally gained its independence in 1994. The Maji Maji Rebellion, which pitted indigenous Tanzanians against their German colonists, left as many as 300,000 natives dead. The German scorched earth policy straight up obliterated local farmland and thus the entire food supply. Maybe a third Maji would have done the trick. Between 1964 and 1973, a CIA-led bombing campaign took place in the country of Laos in order to tip the scales of the Vietnam War. Innocent civilians on the ground were forced into mountainside caves or underground entirely in order to not get blown to smithereens. Sudan is just north of South Sudan, which is south of Sudan, hence the name. The two formally broke up in 2011 due to deep-rooted ethnic, religious, and economic differences. If you feel like having a visual reminder of what your last meal was, you can explore the world of Skopje, an absolutely insane religious sect that took pride in demolishing their own junk in the name of the Lord. Which is appropriate because once you read more about it, you'll be like, oh, Jesus Christ. You know about the dodo bird, right? Well, it was in the country of Mauritius that it went extinct. Within just a century of the Dutch arriving in 1598, the dodo, as well as several other native animal species, were Control-Alt-Deleted from the server. The Bosnian city of Srebrenica was the site of the Srebrenica massacre, a genocidal killing of over 8,000 Bosnian Muslims by the army of the Serb Republic at the conclusion of the Bosnian War. You can't spell Spain without pain. The Spanish Inquisition utilized all kinds of imaginative torture devices to force confessions out of heathens and blasphemers alike. But just as a quick fact, the Spanish Inquisition only saw about 5,000 executed across 356 years. So yeah, I mean, that's still bad, but like, I don't know, I think people have this misconception that hundreds were dying every day. But it's just not true. Witch trials are tried and true, but Latvia's werewolf trials were the real deal. Granted, this was back in the 1600s when the area was known as Livonia, but whatever, burning people alive for stupid superstitious reasons. Because she was such an evil queen, Ranavalona I of Madagascar forced suspected criminals or political opponents to drink a poison concocted from highly toxic tree seeds in order to determine if they were guilty of their crimes. If they survived, they were innocent. Very few survived. The Norse really knew how to deal with criminals. Any Thor, Eric, or Freya could put a permanent end to a declared outlaw without facing any legal repercussions. Panama has that big old canal. About 25,000 Panamanians died building that thing. In the 19th century, the iron ore industry in Luxembourg was booming, but so were all the people working inside the mines. Sierra Leone is, in part, home to the Poro, a creepy-ass secret society of men that have their own language, rituals, and cultural practices. Little is known about them because, you know, secret society. If you're ever convicted of a crime in North Korea, not only are you getting an unlubricated judicial fisting, but your entire living bloodline could as well. Brazilian mental hospitals heavily employed the use of aggressive hydrotherapy for their more extreme cases. Now, while hydrotherapy sounds pretty nice, these patients were either forcibly submerged and restrained in water for hours and hours on end, or had freezing cold water-soaked sheets wrapped around them to control their behavior. If the patients passed out, it was successful. The British Royal Air Force did a lot of aerial policing over the desert regions of Jordan in the 1920s and 1930s, as it was much more cost-effective than having boots on the ground to maintain order. Medieval Ethiopians had specialized witch smellers that could sniff out individuals responsible for dipping into the dark arts. Results varied. The Central African Republic has seen quite a few outbreaks of human African trypanosomiasis. Also known as the sleeping sickness, it's a life-threatening parasitic disease that affects the brain and spinal cord. Within a few weeks, the infection results in impaired cognition and can cause you to sleep throughout the whole day. Oh yeah, and then you die. Did you know that Vietnam has a history before the 1970s? Well, for one, they used to stage full-fledged animal duels during the age of the Nguyen dynasty. Oh, there's really nothing better than a solid chicken parmesan. Anyway, Uganda had a bunch of slaves at one point, I think. The city of Buenos Aires in Argentina turned into a literal sea of corpses with the yellow fever outbreak of 1871. At its peak, nearly 600 Argentinians became Wirgentinians in a single day. If you were a real bad boy in colonial St. Kitts and Nevis, you were put in a public humiliation cage so everyone could point and laugh at what an asshat you were. That'll teach you. Thai soldiers believed for centuries that sakyan, or sacred tattoos, would protect them from harm. But like, actual physical harm, like stopping bullets and knives and other life-threatening weapons. They're probably really disappointed while they bled out. Zambia has one of the largest known copper deposits in the world, and thousands have died getting it out of the ground since the early 1900s. The United Arab Emirates have several abandoned towns that have been reclaimed by the desert. Many believe that spooky, scary spirits inhabit the ruins. Even to this day, Eritrea uses secretive underground prisons to hold high-ranking prisoners. The quality varies. You could either be in a cold underground bunker, or you could be confined in a blistering balls-hot shipping container. Speaking of prisons, it's pretty foreboding to be imprisoned in a location called Shark Island. Well, thousands were in German-controlled Namibia in the early 1900s. There were even stretches of horrific medical research conducted on prisoners in 1906 by Eugene Fischer, who later became a prominent Nazi scientist. I've talked about the Belgian crown's African destruction ad nauseum, so let's switch it up. In 1930, the industrious Belgian city of Angers was farting out some serious air pollution. The smothering smog, which mainly contained fluorine gas, caused severe respiratory distress to thousands and brought about a premature end to 63 people in just 5 days. The Pirates of the Caribbean city of Port Royal is very real, and so is the earthquake that completely reamed it in 1692. 2/3 of the city, as well as 2,000 lives, were immediately lost to the sea. In 1805, plantation slaves in Trinidad and Tobago planned the Christmas Rebellion, in which they plotted to poison their masters. The plot was discovered, and the slave leaders were swiftly and very violently executed. 3 Filipino priests were falsely accused of mutiny in 1872 and were sentenced to death by the super scary garrote, a torture/execution chair that utilizes a rope, chain, wire, whatever to strangle a victim. About 1,200 islands make up the Marshall Islands. Besides getting vaporized by nuclear testing, many of these smaller uninhabited islets are believed to be haunted, according to local superstitions. Besides the whole Jonestown thing, which everyone knows about, I can't really find anything horrifying about the history of Guyana, so here's a scary image to compensate. Malaysia boasts crazy huge tin and rubber resources, even after the British Empire yoinked about $500 billion worth of the stuff in the early 20th century through backbreaking labor performed by Chinese workers. Ireland had its own secret societies for the ultra-wealthy looking to partake in some raunchy debauchery. These societies were dubbed Hellfire Clubs. Palestine is a historical and foundational religious hotspot for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. During the Crusades, Christian Europeans became obsessed with recovering iconic Christian religious relics such as bones of saints, pieces of Jesus' big cross thing, and a bunch of their saviors' personal belongings. Crown Prince Dipendra of Nepal was forbidden from marrying the love of his life. Taking the rational route, he decided to 720 quickscope his king and queen parents before downing himself in 2001. But even with parental blood on his hands, he was still crowned king while in a coma and reigned for 3 days before permanently logging off. Since being founded in the year 455, the Georgian capital city of Tbilisi has been destroyed and rebuilt 29 times. That's perseverance for you. On a somewhat similar note, the island country of St. Lucia has traded hands between the French and British powers 14 times. There was heavy slave ship traffic running through the Bahamas, mainly Spanish ships. Whenever something went awry and these ships were wrecked, any surviving slaves were forced to spend their newfound freedom fighting for survival on remote islands. Christian VII was Denmark's schizophrenic king. His brain didn't work so good. According to biographical reports, he would throw erratic fits, including hucking furniture out of the windows, bonking his gourd against the wall until a red froth came out, and he even strutted his stuff through a royal feast with the old meat and potatoes just swanging around. Unsurprisingly, he was deemed unfit to rule. The Firestone Company makes tires. Tires are made out of rubber. Rubber comes from rubber trees. Lots of rubber trees are found in Liberia. Firestone has been operating the world's largest natural rubber plantation in Liberia for over a century, and it has not been ethical in the slightest. A violent flood tore through London on October 17, 1814, killing 8 people. Eyewitnesses described a 15-foot tall wave that crashed through the streets, completely leveling 2 houses. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that it was beer. It was a beer flood. Under the regime of infamous cave dweller Saddam Hussein in Iraq, deciding to go AWOL from your military obligations meant that you could get your ears chopped off. After a 12-year rebellion where Haitian slaves revolted against their French overlords, they finally gained their freedom as an independent country in 1804. 21 years later, French King Guy Charles X forced Haiti to pay 150 million francs, or upwards of $600 million in compensation to the slave owners. This put Haiti in crippling debt for generations, finally being fully paid off 122 years later in 1947. Camp Boiro in Guinea held an estimated 50,000 political prisoners captive in its walls from 1960 to 1984. It was a site of torture, neglect, and death. Many inmates were forced to partake in the quote, black diet, which was just nothing. No food or water. In order to give itself the image of an ideal, picturesque city, South Korean officials systematically rounded up and dumped over 16,000 homeless people into labor camps while hosting the 1988 Olympics in Seoul. Citizens of the Netherlands were so fed up with their prime minister in 1672 that they murdered and ate him and his brother. Must have been some prime ribs. Vanuatu is an archipelagic country smack dab in the middle of the Pacific, so it has to sustain ongoing volcanic activities, cyclones, and earthquakes. It just can't win. There's a huge misconception about Japanese samurai being these pinnacles of honor and respect. Well, have you ever heard of the practice of tsujigiri? After equipping themselves with a fresh off-the-anvil katana, some samurai would take their new weapons out for a swing by cutting down random unarmed civilians as they walked by at night. Hey. If you were having yourself a relaxing day of fishing along any of the rivers in Tajikistan in the early 90s, you might have ended up hooking a corpse or 10 thanks to all the mass executions happening upstream. In order to keep up with modernization and expanding of the city, Singapore just bulldozed through countless cemeteries. Sorry, great-grandma, but the neighborhood needs a new froyo stand. So I thought it was pronounced Grenada, but apparently it's Grenada. Anyway, the US really plowed Grenada's mound in 1984 when it accidentally deleted an entire mental hospital. Whoops. The coast of Benin was once referred to as the Slave Coast. Take a guess why. A viral outbreak of rinderpest, aka cattle plague, killed off about 90% of Botswana's adorable moo cow population in the 1890s. Poor things. In the 1980s in Iran, your execution would probably last longer than the time you had to defend yourself in court, if you were unlucky enough to spawn in Iran. Need to go through a legal process in Zimbabwe? Well, it's common to contact a spirit medium rather than a lawyer in order to channel spirits to resolve civil disputes, so you better call Sol. Egyptian pharaohs could be so petty. Damnatio memoriae was the practice of altering history by deliberately erasing the names of monuments of rival rulers. Moldova was once part of the Soviet Union, so it took advantage of many of the aspects of communism such as famine, labor camps, and property seizure. The door of no return in Senegal marks the final exit point for millions of slaves over the centuries. As the name suggests, they never returned. Countries across Africa, including Gabon, have experienced mysterious ritualistic killings for centuries. Locals attribute these events to what they call the leopard men, enigmatic assassins known to dress in leopard skins and attack people in the night. Yeah, no, I'm not getting my channel shut down. Finally, we have Uruguay. In the 70s and 80s, Uruguay earned the nickname Latin America's torture chamber because of the insane amount of imprisonment and torture going on. At its peak, 1 in 50 were arrested and imprisoned for some period of time for political reasons. Alright, so that's every country in the world. Do you have any horrifying facts about your home country? Leave a comment below and tell us all about it. Want to watch something else? Then roll the outro.